Under one of my recent microneedling videos, several of you asked if I was worried about microneedling causing facial fat loss. This question has come up a few times under some of my other microneedling videos as well. Now, having actually experienced somewhat extreme facial fat loss several years ago, which then led me to try all kinds of topicals and treatments to try to reverse it, you would think it might be something I am concerned about. However, the short answer is no. I'm not worried about microneedling causing facial fat loss for several reasons. But before I go any further, I have to give you my usual disclaimer. I'm not a dermatologist, I'm not an esthetician. I'm just sharing with you what I have learned in my about 17 years now of microneedling. But as always, please make sure to do your own research. Now, when we are talking about microneedling in this video, we are talking about medical microneedling. There are different forms of microneedling, and I actually have a whole playlist on microneedling, including several videos in which I talk about the different forms. But just in a nutshell, there is nanoneedling, cosmetic needling, and medical microneedling. In nanoneedling and cosmetic needling, depth of needle penetration is quite shallow. Both are mostly for product penetration. Versus in medical microneedling, which is also known as collagen induction therapy, where we use a needle length of 0.5 millimeters or longer, needles do penetrate a bit deeper. They penetrate into the dermis, to be exact. Now, when I personally medical microneedle, I will usually use a needle length of 1 to max 1.5 millimeters around my cheeks and chin area, 0.5 millimeters on my forehead, 0.25 millimeters under my eyes, and 1 millimeter on my neck. And the reason I vary depths of needle penetration depending on the area I treat is that facial skin thickness varies significantly depending on area. Now, to understand why I'm personally not concerned about microneedling causing facial fat loss, let's first of all take a quick look at our facial anatomy. Our face is a bit like a layer cake, with each layer having a specific job or purpose. Layer number 1, so basically what you can see in the mirror, is the epidermis. The epidermis itself consists of 5 distinct layers, including the very top layer, the stratum corneum, which is comprised of dead, flattened skin cells. Depending on area, the epidermis can be extremely thin, like on our eyelids, and a bit thicker in other areas, such as around the chin. Layer number 2 of our layer cake or face is the dermis. In the dermis is where in medical microneedling the magic happens. Unfortunately, in the dermis is also where aging happens. Now, the dermis itself has 2 layers. The papillary dermis, which is the top layer bordering on the epidermis, and the reticular dermis, the bottom layer. Both layers contain, amongst other things, collagen and elastin fibers, with the highest concentration of collagen and elastin fibers found in the reticular dermis. Now, combined, the epidermis and dermis on our face are anywhere from about 0.6 to 2 millimeters thick. This can of course vary slightly from person to person as well as gender. Below the reticular dermis lies layer number 3, the hypodermis. The hypodermis, also known as the subcutaneous layer, is where adipocytes or fat cells live. On the face, the hypodermis is anywhere from 1 to 6 millimeters thick. And below the hypodermis, layer number 4 and 5, is muscle and bone, the scaffolding. So the hypodermis would be the layer we are concerned with if we are fearing facial fat loss. Again, in medical microneedling, we use a needle length of 0.5 millimeters or longer, usually not exceeding 1.5 millimeters in length when treating the face, unless we are treating keloid or raised scars. Now again, facial skin thickness varies greatly depending on area, but let's say I'm treating my cheeks. At 0.5 millimeters, my needles pierce through the stratum corneum, again the very outer layer of the skin. They go through the epidermis and they are just starting to enter into the dermis. At 1 millimeter, I am right smack in the dermis. At 1.5 millimeters, I am deep in the reticular dermis. Again, all throughout the dermis, we find collagen and elastin fibers. In the reticular dermis, they are a bit more concentrated. So what happens when these tiny little needles enter into the dermis is they basically create a tiny controlled injury, which sets off a wound healing cascade. In other words, the body recognizes that we created a bit of damage and it begins to repair it. It floods the area with growth factors and begins producing more collagen and elastin. Over time and with repetition, this increased collagen and elastin production leads to smoother, firmer, more even-toned skin. Now, as I mentioned earlier, personally I do like to go 1 to 1.5 millimeters deep around my cheeks. And this, of course, would be an area of concern if I was fearing facial fat loss. Now, at 1.5 millimeters, which again puts my needles deeply into the reticular dermis, I might be getting close to the dermis-hypodermis boundary, but I'm not meaningfully penetrating into the hypodermis. But let's say I would. Let's say I choose a needle length long enough to pierce through the reticular dermis into the hypodermis, which I wouldn't do, and I wouldn't recommend anybody else do, not because of a fear of facial fat loss, but because for the magic in medical microneedling to happen, we want to be in the dermis, where again collagen and elastin fibers are found. We don't want to be in the hypodermis. But let's say I choose a needle length long enough to pierce through the reticular dermis into the hypodermis. Would that actually lead to the destruction of adipocytes, and with that eventually facial fat loss? I would say while it could cause excessive inflammation and maybe even scarring, it would probably not lead to the destruction of adipocytes. I say probably because there's always an exception to the rule. But adipocytes primarily die through a programmed process called apoptosis, which is triggered by extreme cold, extreme heat, chemical disruption, or significant metabolic stress. In these 17 years, I have regularly medical microneedled, so every 4 to 6 weeks over the past 17 years, I have never experienced facial fat loss. And I have to admit, when I first started medical microneedling, I did go a bit too deep, because back then I thought, if a little is good, more is better. But even then, like I said, in these 17 years, I have regularly, every 4 to 6 weeks, medical microneedled. I have never experienced facial fat loss. And to this date, no scientific papers have shown a link between microneedling and the destruction of fat cells. What papers have shown, though, is a link between radiofrequency microneedling and the destruction of fat cells, which is often a desired effect, especially when treating certain areas of the body. But of course, most of us don't want to lose our precious facial fat, which is something that has been reported to happen with radiofrequency microneedling. In fact, the FDA just recently, in October of 2025, issued a safety alert warning that radiofrequency microneedling can cause serious long-term complications, including permanent scars, severe burns, fat loss or diminished facial volume, and nerve damage. These are considered rare complications, and they're usually due to improper technique, excessive energy being used, and or the treatment being way too deep. So radiofrequency microneedling can cause facial fat loss because the heat generated by the radiofrequency can damage or kill fat cells. Now, there are plenty of people who have had radiofrequency microneedling sessions with great results and zero facial fat loss. If you're one of them, please let us know down below. Personally, I was one of the unlucky ones who did experience somewhat extreme facial fat loss after I received 3 radiofrequency microneedling sessions several years ago. I did have some other stuff going on around the same time, which could have contributed to my facial fat loss. But I do believe that the radiofrequency microneedling sessions were a big part of it. So there is clinical evidence suggesting that radiofrequency microneedling can lead to fat loss, which again is often a desired effect, especially when treating certain areas on the body. But no clinical evidence suggesting that regular microneedling can do the same. But what about those of you who have told me that you indeed did lose facial fat after receiving regular microneedling sessions? Assuming proper technique was used, there are a few things which could explain why one might think they have lost some facial volume after regular microneedling sessions. First off, after microneedling, there can be a bit of swelling. And this is usually my favorite stage because that bit of swelling does make my face look more plump and youthful. Of course, that swelling dissipates after a few days, so one could think they lost a bit of volume. Secondly, over time, with new collagen being induced, skin tends to tighten a bit, which could also look a bit like possible volume loss. Weight fluctuation and water retention can also play a role. And then lastly, of course, unfortunately, we do lose facial volume with age. In fact, it is estimated that by age 50, we have lost about 40% of our facial volume, which is a real bummer. But I hope this video was helpful. Again, I am not the slightest bit concerned about microneedling. If done correctly, we always have to stress that, if done correctly, I'm not the slightest bit concerned about microneedling causing facial fat loss. Because again, first of all, I don't enter into the hypodermis, and secondly, no factors which can lead to the destruction of adipocytes, such as extreme heat, extreme cold, or chemical disruption, are involved. Any questions or comments, please leave them down below. Always love to hear from you. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time, bye.